Good evening, by the way. It's my great honor and pleasure to be up here on the stage with someone who I consider a brother, a great friend, and a great hero. And I'm going to be the mediator, I suppose. I'm going to walk this together. First thing I suppose we should talk about is growing up, I guess, where you came from, your roots, which you and I are pretty familiar with, similar kind of upbringing. I'm sure they'd love to hear about where you came from.
We were actually joking right before we came here. Just first, thank you to everybody that came here tonight. I think one of the things that Johnny and I bonded over that, made us able to relate to each other was that we both really did come from what amounts to white trash backgrounds. And, we were even joking right before we walked in that we were bringing the trailer park to New York. I grew up in a state of poverty that was just so profound that whenever my family did finally move up into a trailer park, we really thought we were moving up in the world. We had running water and electricity. And we didn't even have that until I was in my teenage years. We grew up in a state that is beyond even poverty.
Yeah, so I wonder what deviled ham was a luxury. Expand.
That's what the rich people ate.
We finally moved up to that. Deviled ham and the spam and stuff like that. It's a weekly ritual. In the book, there's you write about your maternal grandmother who raised you when you were very young. You want to speak about your first memories of her?
My grandmother was pretty much like my mother. She raised me when I was about 3 years old. My sister was born. And my mother felt like she couldn't raise both of us. She didn't have whatever she needed to take care of 2 kids. So she basically gave me my grandmother to raise. So my grandmother became my mother. And she was always the sense of security and comfort. And the thing in my life that always made me feel like everything was going to be okay, that was my grandmother. Whenever she died while I was in jail waiting to go to trial. And when she died, it was like that was my family dying. She was a little bit crazy too, though. She could be trigger happy at times.
Didn't she?
Shooting at snakes.
Yeah.
Any excuse to get the gun out. She
Yeah. But my family was hatchets. They jumped the fence to get to, the person they wanted to cleave. When you were in second grade, you write that your family, by the time you were in second grade, that your family had moved around so many different places, and I can certainly relate to that. The constant moving. I mean, I know how it feels, but how did it affect you as a kid? I mean, moving around so much.
We moved around so much that I can't even remember a lot of the places we lived anymore. At one point, Lori was doing research for the case just to try to figure out how many different places I had lived and how often we had moved. And I think she counted at one point something like 13 times in a single year we had moved. We would literally live in a place sometimes 2 weeks before moving again. And a lot of it was just because, my parents were, this was after I left my grandmother. I would go stay with my parents for short periods of time. And every time I was with them, we would start moving again just because my father always seemed to believe that there was something better in the next place we would go to. Of course, there wasn't. There was nothing waiting for him there except the same hangover he left at the other place.
But
that didn't stop him from trying. I guess that's one of the reasons I didn't stay in school. You know, I didn't really have any deep roots in any particular school. Never really had any friends. We didn't stay there long enough to make it.
Yeah. No, I remember I had some very similar experiences. We used to move constantly. Like, I mean, it was like really on the verge of. You felt like you were on the run. You know what I mean? Like you'd come home from school and suddenly like there were boxes everywhere.
Exactly.
You know, we're getting out of here. You know, it's like quit. So you felt like Jesus, you know, like some kind of fugitive at the age of 7. One time we moved from one house in this little town to the house next door. That's a true story. And I felt like, at the time, because we moved so much, I felt that, well, this is an ingenious plan. We don't have to leave this town. They'll never look for us next door. Yeah. I want to talk about Ivan a little bit.
Ivan, he was what I came to know as my grandfather. He wasn't actually my biological grandfather. My biological grandfather died when I was really young. And my grandmother remarried this guy named Ivan, who probably wasn't all there either. He thought it was. He used to tell me the most outrageous stuff, and I would tell some of the guys in prison about it, and they would say, you know, your grandfather was a racist. It didn't occur to me at the time, though. I just thought he was telling me crazy stories. You know, literally one time he told me, he used to work at a flea market. He would go around and take stuff out of people's garbage and then fix it up and take it to a flea market and sell it. And one time he had like several huge boxes full of tube socks he had gotten somewhere. But I noticed all the white people that would come through didn't even stop and look at him. But several times black people stopped and bought socks from him. And I asked him, I said, why are no white people buying socks? Why are the only people buying the socks black people? And he says, because if their feet get cold, they'll die. And, you know, I'm only like 7 years old at the time, so I believed him. You know, I thought it sounded crazy, but, you know, I thought, what reason did he have to lie to me? And it struck me as this really bizarre thing, and I was trying to get more answers from him. You know, why? Will white people die if their feet get cold too? And he would just look at me. You know, he wouldn't even answer by that point. He would just stare at me or tell me to go outside for a while. He thought it was pretty funny whenever I get hurt a lot of times too. You know, one of the things I wrote about in the book that they quoted in the New York Times was one time he's sitting on the front porch drinking beer, and he says, go pick that board up, boy. So I go over there to pick it up, and I'm standing there looking at him like, what do I do with it now? And then I started feeling this stinging sensation on every part of my body, where there was a mountain of fire ants under the board, and as soon as I picked it up, they covered me and started chewing and biting and stinging. And he just sat there laughing, thought it was the funniest thing he'd ever seen.
Sipping his beer.
Just sipping his beer.
But you had a fondness for him. I mean, there was some fondness for him.
I did. I don't know why. I did. You know, I guess it was because he was my grandfather.
Yeah. It also sounds pretty funny.
It could be.
Yeah. So if we jump forward to a radically different place, the prison system basically, just going into prison, and you describe it as, you know, one of obvious great brutality and abuse. And if you don't mind, just telling the people here some of the stuff you witnessed, some of the abuse you were was put to you, you know.
There's so much, you know, that's one of the things I would barely even know where to start talking about, because it's like a daily occurrence there. You come to expect it all the time. You know, one of the worst things whenever I first got there, you know, it wasn't anything personal. The guards just decided they were going to welcome me to the neighborhood. So they took me to the Hole. And in prison, the Hole is it's this place completely completely separated from the rest of the prison. It's dark, it's filthy, it's full of rats. In the summertime, it can reach up to 120 degrees. It's just misery in and of itself. But then they would come in at midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning and chain me to the bars of the cell and beat me with nightsticks, and just, it was never ending. It went on for 18 straight days. And I still have kidney damage to this day because they beat me so bad at one point I started pissing blood. And even when I got out, I still used to have nightmares about it. You know, that was probably the worst time. It was an 18-day stretch. But I would see things all the time. You have a lot of people in prison. You know, the guy that he had catatonic schizophrenia. And he would freeze in a toilet sometimes. He would not move for hours. And the guards felt it like a game, and they would beat him, slap him, punch him to try to make him move. Because he was snapping out of his head. He was just all calm down, so he never would do it. And it got worse over the years. The worst part was like the last 2 years ago, where there was a guard in another prison that beat an inmate so bad he lost an eye. And the media wrote a few stories about it in the local newspaper. So the prison said, well, we got to get this guy out of here because he's bringing negative attention down on us. So instead of firing him, they promote him to warden and send him to my prison.
Nice. Yeah. I mean, I know. I mean, the majority of us, or at least for sure I would have folded at some point or another. I mean, you just fold in upon yourself. Or, maybe the greatest thing that could happen to you is that you go completely insane and you don't care or think, or, you just become. So I imagine there's a lot of people who were driven to insanity because of it.
Yeah, a lot of them are insane before they ever even come in. Sure. Most people don't know. In society, we're fed this image that on death row you have all of these criminal genius, Hannibal Lecter types. And in reality, it's just not true. The average IQ on death row is something like 85, and that's like at the high end of the spectrum. You have people there that are way below that. People there that are absolutely stark, raving nuts who have no contact with reality whatsoever. Some of them are like that when they come in, and some of them are driven that way by the conditions in the prison. There was a guy that came in, and he was okay for a while, and then one night he just snaps and starts punching the walls in his cell until both his fists are just busted up and bloody. He's screaming and yelling at the devil in his cell, and all they do is take him out, bandage his hands back up, and throw him back in the cell. Probably the worst case in the Arkansas prison system was this guy that had shot himself in the head, and he survived it, but he had pretty much given himself a lobotomy. And when they asked him what he wanted for his last meal, he says pecan pie. He eats half of it and then wraps the other half up and says he's going to save it until after the execution. That's how gone this guy was.
Wow. Just leave it right there. You're back.
Yeah.
In a while. Yeah. Was there in terms of the Varner unit, when you were transferred, there was a great difference?
Oh yeah, they actually, a bunch of defense attorneys got together at one point and started filing a lawsuit about the prison conditions there. And they had a federal inspector come in and look at the prison, and he said it was the worst conditions he had ever seen outside of Guantanamo Bay. And it's still operating like that now. It takes a lot to bring about any change in prison because most people, in the world don't care. They figure if you're in prison, you deserve whatever you get anyway.
And when you were, because you'd already been in, by the time we went to the Varner unit, you'd been in eight years, am I correct?
Yeah, I was there about 8 years, and when they moved us over to the super maximum security unit, I was put in solitary confinement, and I was in there for almost a decade before I got out. So I literally went from almost a decade of solitary confinement to one day them saying, okay, get out.
And a night, the first night, or any given night, total isolation, actually. I mean, thoughts range from everything. You told me once that there was a little spider in the window. You'd be focused on, that would help you focus, keep your attention.
You have to find something to focus your attention on a day-to-day basis. A lot of people, whenever they first come in, they don't realize how long they're going to be in there or how hard their life is about to become. So they live in this state of constantly looking forward, constantly looking to a day when they're going to get out of prison. And those are the ones that go crazy, because you can't live like that in there. You come in and your attorneys will tell you they think they're going to be able to do something in your case in 6 months or a year, and you're still sitting there 5 years later, 10 years later, 15 years later. You have to find things to focus on your day-to-day life, as hard as it is, and it's almost impossible. Really, you have to forge some sort of life for yourself so that you don't focus on prison conditions all the time. And it could be anything, anything at all. You have guys in there that, there was a guy that started a collection of eyeballs that he cut out of magazines. He would just go through magazines and cut out every eyeball in the entire magazine. Some people focused on more constructive things. Some people just lost it altogether.
But that, for example, those people, who you would say are on some level mentally handicapped or challenged or whatever, however you attack that word, were executed.
Yeah.
Well, the weird thing is that legal execution. I don't know.
Exactly, lethal injection. It's supposed to be illegal. It's supposed to be illegal. The term, I realize it's not the correct term that people use now, but in the law, there's no such thing as mentally challenged or anything like that. What the guidelines, the rules, it's very black and white. They say either you are mentally retarded or you are not mentally retarded. That's the dividing line. They say it's legal to execute you if you're not mentally retarded. It's illegal to execute the mentally retarded. They try to make it look like it's a very clean-cut line. But even then, they execute people that, they're so far below normal, IQ-wise, that they do it all the time. The state will just get somebody to come in and say, there's nothing wrong with this guy, he's okay, and they put him to death. You have people in there that are just, oh God, I couldn't even begin to describe it. The guy comes up to me one day and spits in my face because he says, I gave him ingrown toenails. And he believes this. He believes it with all his heart and soul. He says that the nurses are calling him down to the prison infirmary so that they can drink his blood. He files paperwork in the prison because he says, my mother is sneaking in through the ventilation shaft at night and that she got him pregnant. And it's not like he's doing this, in court where people are going to see it and say, okay, we're not going to kill this guy because he's crazy. He's doing this when nobody's watching, nobody's around. It's real. And they still put people like that to death all the time. In the time I was there, they carried out between 25 and 30 executions. I lost count after I was there. And you don't ever get used to it, ever. It's, you would think that maybe as time went on, as years went on, as dozens of executions are getting out, maybe you get a little numb to it, maybe you get used to it, but you don't. The horror just grows and grows, and maybe that had something to do with getting older, too. When I was young and I went in, I don't think I was capable of comprehending the full horror of what I was seeing to take place in front of me, but as I grew older, it just got worse and worse and worse.
And out of those 25, 30, or however many executions, how many of those, it's maybe a very difficult question to answer. How many of those people do you feel may have been or were innocent?
That I know of, I'm pretty, one guy that was executed, they actually found DNA at the crime scene that did not match this guy. It was a rape and a murder, and they found out the DNA did not match the guy they had in prison, but they still executed him. And a lot of the reason for that is because you can have all the evidence in the world, and it's still only 50% of the case. The other 50% is the media has to focus on. If they don't, then they're just going to sweep all the evidence in the world under the rug and kill the guy. There are 2 more guys right now on death row that I know of. In the time that I was there, the average number of people on death row ranged from like 40 to 45 usually. That's about how many there are right now, and I'd say out of the ones that are left there, there are 2 more that I'm pretty positive are innocent.
And they're still sitting there rotting.
They are. One of them at least has a decent chance of maybe one day seeing the outside world because a lot of people have started to recognize what's wrong in his case and rally around him. The other guy, they're probably going to execute him this coming spring.
That's just insane. Yeah. You mentioned in the book that there were, obviously, the usual contraband of food and things like that. You mentioned pets in death row.
Yeah.
I think that's just in terms of imagery, that's a pretty interesting image about the rats.
That's probably the #1 pet